by Clotilde of Sauvé. On the evening of May 28, 1898, amateur Italian photographer Secondo Pia was given permission to photograph the shroud for the first time. The shroud's image on the cloth is very faint, but to Secondo Pia's surprise, the image of the shroud contained significantly more detail on his negative plate. Photographic negatives of the shroud give a positive image result. This means on a certain level, the image on the shroud is a photographic negative. Secondo Pia was initially accused by some of doctoring the photographs, but the image results would later be verified in 1931 by professional photographer Giuseppe Enri. His photographic negatives also showed the enhanced image of the face and body on the shroud. These detailed images on the cloth that only become visible on photographic negatives proved to many the authenticity of the shroud. It seemed inconceivable that if it were a forgery, that it could produce such a miraculous image, especially since the process of photography had not existed at the time the shroud first appeared. In 1902, French professor Yves Delage published the first study of the shroud based on the photographic images. Being professor of comparative anatomy, he declared that the images to be anatomically flawless, and that he believed the images were made by some sort of contact with a corpse, whether it was direct or indirect. Similar studies in 1936 and 1981 also agree with Delage's study. These studies were all indirect, and they didn't have any access to the shroud. The studies were based on the photographic evidence only. In 1969 and 1973 saw the first direct examination of the shroud by a scientific team. The main purpose of this group was to advise on methods of preserving the shroud and to determine the best testing methods to subject the shroud to. They took the preliminary samples on the shroud's fabric in 1973. The initial tests on the shroud under conventional and electron microscopes found no trace of pigments at that time. Pigment would be expected if the shroud was a painting of some sort. The 11-member Turin Commission took fabric samples by using a custom-designed form of adhesive tape that allowed the trace samples of the cloth's fibers to be examined without disturbing the integrity of the shroud's image. The tape was applied to 32 different sections on the shroud. They found that the image on the shroud is limited to the surface layer only and does not permeate all the way through the cloth. In 1979, Walter Macron analyzed samples of the shroud given to him by STURP, the Shroud of Turin Research Project. This group formed in 1977 as an offshoot of the Turin Commission. This group had over 30 members studying the shroud in 1978. Macron found that the image is made of billions of sub-micrometer pigment particles, particularly iron oxide. Others would confirm the presence of iron oxide on the shroud, but disagree that it is the compound that forms the image on the shroud. Champions of the authenticity of the shroud suggest the possibility that in the Middle Ages people would place items on the shroud to make them more holy. Paintings could have been placed on the shroud and transferred the iron oxide onto it. Also, the iron oxide seems to be evenly distributed over the fabric of the shroud. This probably would not be the case if the iron oxide was used in the making of the image. There would be higher concentrations in different parts of the cloth. This suggests that the iron oxide is probably a contaminant and not the building block of the image. Max Frey, a Swiss police criminologist, found pollen on the STURP tape samples taken from the shroud. Frey claimed finding 58 different types of pollens, 45 native to Jerusalem, 6 from the eastern Middle East, 1 pollen from Constantinople in Turkey, and 2 pollens from Edessa, also in Turkey. This pollen trail seemed to agree with the legends of the shroud's movements over the years. Frey's findings would be challenged by a fellow STURP scientist who said that he found no pollen on his tape samples of the shroud. An independent study of the pollen strands showed that One out of the 26 provided contained significantly more pollen than the others, possibly suggesting it was planted there. Max Fry's reputation was also called into question when he overstated evidence on a separate matter that did not involve the shroud. Computer image analysis of the shroud found that the body on the shroud has three-dimensional properties encoded in it. When you interpret the darker parts as being closest to the body and the lighter areas further away. After a digital study of the shroud in 1978, NASA researchers reported finding impressions of coins placed on both eyes. The two lepton coins on the right the two-lepton coin on the right eyelid was presumed coined under Pontius Pilate in 2930 AD, while the one-lepton coin on the left eye was coined in 29 AD. In 1979, Greek and Latin letters were discovered written near the face by Pierre Ugoludi. They would be further studied in 1997 by André Marion. Through computer analysis and microdensometer readings, they were able to uncover more writing and translations of the words found read as follows: "You will go to death, Nazarene Jesus." The apparent bloodstains on the shroud were studied and produced differences of opinion as to the nature of the blood. Walter Macron's discovery of iron oxide convinced him that the image and bloodstains were from medieval pigments, and while Alan Alda identified the reddish stains as blood of the AB type and interpreted the iron oxide as a natural residue from the breakdown of the hemoglobin in the blood. Further studies also found the stains to be from blood of AB type and the presence of and also confirmed the presence of hemoglobin. The Sturb scientists then sent traces of the blood to the State University of New York to its lab that is devoted to the study of ancient blood, but Dr. Andrew Merriweather stated that no blood typing could be confirmed and that the DNA was badly fragmented, and he felt the samples were almost certainly blood, but he could not make any definitive statements on its nature. There were those who still argued that the results that Adler and others had gotten could still be the result from tempera paint from medieval times. Also, the finding of blood of AB type may point to the shroud being a forgery because scientific thought is that AB blood type is of a more recent origin, perhaps no earlier than 700 AD. In 1988, the Catholic Church allowed the shroud to be radiocarbon dated. They used portions of the shroud taken from the corner. The universities of Oxford, Arizona, and the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology all came back with the same results. The material dated to 1260 to 390 AD, the same time period that the shroud first appeared in France. This for a time seemed to dampen the belief that the shroud was authentic, but there were concerns that they may have tested a segment of cloth that had been added during the repair. Also, the fire that the shroud was in could have skewed the results of the testing. In the following years, there would be scientists and people that would support these ideas. Carbon dating is not a perfect science, and there's a lot of variables that can affect it. Forensic evidence in the shroud suggests that it is genuine, while the radiocarbon dating suggests forgery. Believers in the shroud wonder why a forger would bother with small details, such as dirt particles found on the shroud by Joseph Kolbeck and Richard Levi Seti. These particles were of travertine aragonite limestone, the same type of stone found in Jerusalem tombs and near the Damascus Gate. In 1985, Alan Wanger noticed the outlines of flowers from the 1931 photographs of the shroud. In 1997, the flowers would be identified as a Chrysanthemum cornarium. These flowers bloom in March and April in Jerusalem, in the Jerusalem area. In 2008, Envarium Danon reported that the analysis of the 1931 photos and the 1978 ultraviolet images indicated that the faint outlines of flowers were genuine and not an anomaly of photography. In 2002, the shroud underwent restoration, and the backside of the shroud was found to have a faint